Welcome to our session, which I'm calling an Introduction to Sephardic Jewry. And I'm going to pop on the PowerPoint. I hope I still can let people in from the waiting room. I probably shouldn't have enacted the waiting room. Okay, everybody see the PowerPoint?
Yes.
Okay, good.
Yep.
So, in this discussion, I'm going to explain the origins of Sephardic Judaism. As you will see, most Jews in the United States, about 95% of Jews in the United States are Ashkenazi Jews, and many Ashkenazi Jews have never met a Sephardic Jew. And I was actually attending a little discussion of Sephardic Jewry in Los Angeles, and they were pointing out the same thing on the other side of the coin, that in this case, a young woman from Iran, from Persia, came to the United States at age 9, and she had never met an Ashkenazi Jew. So the worlds don't often meet. I think, as many of you know, I often speak about her. My wife, Sonia, is from Casablanca, Morocco, and she is definitely a Sephardic Jew. And more people are showing up. Okay, so I think the first thing I have, I always do this. If you want copies of the slides, I'm including these under the topic of Jewish literacy. So if you go to my website and you click on classes, and in Jewish literacy class, I have this is now the 4th subject that we've discussed under what I'm calling Jewish literacy 2. And some more people are coming in. That's weird. Okay. And so I'm going to begin with some music. I found a wonderful rendition of Ein Kelohenu in Ladino. So before I start, actually, I think I can go to so before I click and start it, Ladino is the sort of the Sephardic equivalent of Yiddish. So it is quite commonly, it's a mixture of Spanish. As we'll see, Sephardim truly means Jews from Spain. So it's a mixture of Spanish and a little bit of Hebrew. And it has this wonderful Arabic beat to it. And it's just a nice photo collage of things Sephardic to the Ladino Ein Kelohenu. And you'll hear the alternating Hebrew verses and Ladino verses. So enjoy. Oh, you know what? I got to stop it. I just realized I did not enable the computer sound. So I would be enjoying it, but you guys wouldn't be hearing it at all. Okay, so as we start it, if you don't hear it, speak up.
Ein Kelohenu, ein Kadonenu, ein Kemalkenu, ein Kemoshienu, non como nuestro Dios, non como nuestro Señor, non como nuestro Rey, non como nuestro Salvador. Mi Eloheinu, mi Adonenu, mi Kemalkenu, mi Kemoshienu, quien como nuestro Dios, quien como nuestro Señor, quien como nuestro Rey, quien como nuestro Salvador. No del Eloheinu, no del Adonenu, no del Malkeinu, no del Moshienu, lo oremos a nuestro Dios, lo oremos a nuestro Señor, lo oremos a nuestro Rey, lo oremos a nuestro Salvador.
Whoops, sorry. Sorry, I have to do this to admit people.
Eloheinu, Baruch Adonai, Baruch Malkeinu, Baruch Moshienu, bendicho nuestro Dios, bendicho nuestro Señor, bendicho nuestro Rey, bendicho nuestro Salvador.
I'll let one more person in. Oh, he's joining. Okay.
Atahu Eloheinu, Atahu Adonenu, Atahu Malkeinu, Atahu Señor, tú el nuestro Rey, tú el nuestro Salvador.
Okay.
Do you have a translation for that?
Well, it's Ein Kelohenu. You know, it's
no, but the pieces in between when they were singing in the other language.
Yes, it's the same. But like Mi Eloheinu is who is like God, and they say now I can't remember the Spanish, but basically the Spanish is just the same as the Hebrew. And they say, non como vuestro Dios, Dios. There's no one like our God. Non como vuestro Señor. There's none like our Lord. Señor is Lord. Non como vuestro Rey. There's no one like our King. Non como vuestro Salvador. There's no one like our Savior. And if you know some Spanish, you will notice that instead of nuestro with an N, they are using muestro with an M, which is medieval Spanish. So as we'll see, this is Spanish that's coming, you know, from the 12th, 13th century, 14th century. So Spanish has changed, and the Spanish of Ladino is a medieval Spanish. Okay, any questions so far? Or, you know, you got a couple of people who we're welcoming. I'm just going to take a look and see if I can see. Okay, I had somebody try and join me from Guatemala. I'm not sure they made it in. Let's go back. Okay, so clearly we're talking about a different group of Jews, and there have always been different groups of Jews. So in ancient times, we had the 12 tribes. We had the, I got to go back to the waiting room. We had the Kohen, the priests, the Levites, and the Israelites. We had Pharisees, Sadducees, Essenes, Zealots, the Nazarenes, which were the those first century Jews that followed Jesus of Nazareth. So there's always been different groups of Jews. And for a very long time, as we will see, we have had the Ashkenazim and the Sephardim. We also, of course, in current day Judaism, have different movements, but interestingly, and we will discuss this, the movements are only in the Ashkenazi world, not in the Sephardic world. There are no Orthodox, conservative, or Reform Sephardic Jews. In the Orthodox world, we have ultra-Orthodox, Hasidic Orthodox, modern Orthodox. I think you're familiar with conservative and Reform. And then there are other movements that are sort of in their beginnings, such as Jewish renewal. The movements are really a response to modernity. So in roughly the 1820s in Germany, a very strange thing happens. That strange thing is all of a sudden nations where Jews are living are accepting the Jews. Particularly these are nations where what will become the Sephardic Jews, the Ashkenazi Jews are living. And so then the question is, how do we deal with a world where nations accept us? We're very good at dealing with a world where we're shunned and put in ghettos. We'll talk about this a little bit, but we don't quite know what to do when nations accept us, when Germans accept us as German citizens, when French accept us as French citizens. So the first movement in the Ashkenazi world, and you can say the first movement in Judaism, is reform. And it makes accommodations in Jewish practice to try and allow intermingling and doing business and being a good citizen of all of these nations in the world. And I am going to get, Deborah's asking the difference between Sephardic and Mizrahi. So we have Reform Judaism beginning, and of course the Orthodox aren't happy with these innovations. So a organized Orthodox movement forms in response to the Reform movement. And then the conservative movement is actually the newest of the movements, or newer than either Reform or Orthodox, and it really begins as the Ashkenazi Ashkenazim are entering the United States, you know, around the turn of the 19th to the 20th century. So the origins of Ashkenazi and Sephardic Jewry. Well, hold on, Jose, you got to be a little more quiet. In 586 BCE, you know what I'm going to do is I'm going to interrupt this for a second, and I am going to mute everyone, and you can unmute yourself. But sometimes we get some interesting static going on. Now let me go back. So in 586 BCE, the Babylonians destroy the first temple and take the Jewish leadership to Babylon. 50 years later, the Persian Empire conquers Babylon and allows the Jews to return to rebuild the temple. But as it turns out, many Jews are very happy to stay in Babylon. Thank you very much. We'll just stay here. This is the first diaspora. This is the first time we have a significant Jewish community living outside the Holy Land. In the next few hundred years, particularly in the Holy Land, we have the rise of Greek influence with Alexander the Great and Hellenism. Ultimately, you all know the story of Hanukkah and the Maccabean revolt, which throws off the intrusion of the Greeks and establishes once again a Jewish rulership, both as priesthood and king. But hard to believe, but there was an argument over who the new king should be and who the high priest should be. Can you imagine Jews arguing with Jews? I know it's hard to imagine. But the Hasmoneans, the successors to the Maccabees, invite Rome, who is becoming this great power, to come in to settle the dispute between the varying parties. And Rome comes in, and Rome never leaves. So this, of course, leads to revolts against Rome, unsuccessful revolts in both the year 66 and the year 135. 66 revolt is called the Great Revolt. Temples destroyed in the year 70. 135 is the Bar Kokhba revolt, also unsuccessful. So the result of these revolts is the destruction of the temple and the Roman persecution of Jews and Judaism. It leads to the leading rabbi of the time, Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi, to write down the oral law. I'll remind you, there is something called the oral law. In Jewish tradition, God gave Moses two revelations, a written Torah and an oral Torah, with the instructions, don't write down the oral Torah. But because the Jews are being so harassed by the Romans, that Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi, the leading rabbi of the time, says, if we don't write this down, we're going to lose it. So he writes down what he considers to be the most important part of the oral law in a book called the Mishnah, about in the year 200 CE. And then the rabbis in the Holy Land and back in, it's called Bavel, but of course the Babylonians aren't in charge. Probably the Persians are still in charge. I don't know the detailed history of Babylon. But in these two different groups, you have two different schools, and they are writing a commentary on the Mishnah. That commentary is called the Gemara. When it's all pulled together, the Mishnah plus the Gemara equals the Talmud. And because these discussions are going on in two separate lands, we have two separate Talmuds. What in the Mishnah would make writing it down so bad? It's a great question, Bryce, but it's a subject for a different time, that we should have both an oral law and a written law. It's not bad. It just keeps the law alive. It's a great subject, and we'll take it up when I have my class on Jewish literacy. So we have these two different groups writing commentaries on the Mishnah. In the Holy Land, it's called the Yerushalmi or the Jerusalem Talmud, but it is compiled under the oppression of the Romans, and in the year roughly 313 of the Common Era, Rome adopts Christianity as its official language, official religion. And so we have a lot of harassment of the Jewish schools pulling together their Talmud. In Babylon, as you'll see in a minute, the Jews are far more nicely treated, far more welcome. So the editing is better because it's not rushed, more complete, and the structure is more carefully put together. And this is attributed to the higher exposure to Greek logic and thought that was very prominent in Babylon. The Holy Land is ruled and oppressed by the Romans and the Christians, but in Babylon, the Jews are really independent and well respected by the local government. The Jews of the Holy Land are living first under Roman domination and then under Christian domination. This is a little bit of an oversimplification, but by and large, they become the Ashkenazim. And they travel with trade routes and under the dominion of the Romans and the Christians. The Jews of Babylon are associated with those lands where Islam flourishes. Islam is founded much later in the 7th century. And they become, and I'll explain the difference between Mizrahi and Sephardim. So they become the Mizrahim and the Sephardim and really dominate Jewish intellectual life for the next 1,000 years. For most of Jewish history, Sephardic Jews are dominant in Jewish law and culture. Just some examples of this: the most important legal code, the Shulchan Aruch, is written by Joseph Cairo around 1500, is really written for Sephardim. Ashkenazi rabbi Moshe Aserlis writes a commentary to apply Jewish law to for Ashkenazim. The Kabbalah is developed in the Sephardic world. The major seat of Jewish culture, so-called Golden Age of Judaism, is in Spain. And the Jews are expelled very famously from Spain in 1492. And they're given the choice of convert, leave, or die. And the estimate is about a third die, about a third convert to become Catholic, and about a third leave. Most go to Portugal, where they are expelled 5 years later. The Christians are never quite confident that the Jews that have converted are really practicing Christianity or practicing Catholicism. So there is an inquiry called the Inquisition to spy on and check on these suspect Jews. And the Inquisition actually lasts for 400 years. And I'll mention it again, but many Jews outwardly convert, but secretly continue to practice Judaism. The Jews that leave are welcomed into the Ottoman Empire, Muslim lands, and other European nations, including the United States. The initial Jewish settlers in America were all Sephardic. The major wave of Ashkenazim is from the late 19th and early 20th century, and most American Jews trace their ancestry back to this period. And Spain, as a way of I guess, apologizing or repenting from its action of expelling Sephardic Jews in the they began this process in the 500th anniversary in 1992, and ultimately they decided to offer Spanish citizenship to all Jews who can prove that they are Sephardic. And once again, if you have questions, either just unmute yourself and ask, or raise your hand and I can see it. You raise your hand by clicking on participants in the bottom of your window. So the Marranos or conversos come from this era of forced conversion, which starts as early as 1148. As time goes on, these Jews who convert are called in various quarters anusim, which are, it's a Hebrew word meaning those who are compelled. Nuevos Cristianos, that would be Spanish for new Christians. Conversos, also Spanish for converts, or Marranos, which I think is a medieval Spanish word for pigs. Some conversions were sincere, and many people remained secret Jews. There were riots and massacres against the Jews beginning back early, clearly before the expulsion. And the church begins the Inquisition, as I mentioned, to ferret out these secret Jews. And there all kinds of things were done. Let me just make sure there's joining. Okay, so people would watch the chimneys of Jewish houses. because obviously an observant Jew would not be lighting fires on the Sabbath. So if you didn't have fires on the Sabbath, that would make you suspect. They would even have their laundry washed to see if people were preparing special cleaning and cleaning clothes and cleaning tablecloths and things for Sabbath dinners. To this day, there are amazing accounts of conversos discovering their Jewish roots, and there's no shortage of books on the subject. One of my favorites is this one, The Mezuzah in Madonna's Foot, Marranos and Other Secret Jews, a woman discovers her hidden identity, And one of the funny stories about this is Trudy Alexei once came, I think, to Temple of Dad Elohim to speak. And she said she had this book in line to be published. And then the publisher changed management and they were reviewing which books would be published, which books wouldn't be published. And she said the only reason her book got published is the new publisher had no idea what it was about, but he thought it was something about Madonna. So it wound up getting published. The other story I want to tell is from Adad Elohim, and I'm going to actually stop sharing, and so I can see you. At Adad Elohim, the educator told a story that she had a visitor from Spain, a student, an exchange student, living with her, young woman, 14 or 15 years old, from Spain, Christian, Catholic, as most Spaniards are. And of course, being a Jewish educator, she brought her to a Temple of Dad Elohim for Friday night services. And at Friday night services, sitting in the sanctuary, and all of a sudden it's time for the Shema, and everybody stands up to chant the Shema out loud, which is the Reformed tradition. And when they do, this young woman runs out of the synagogue, shaking and in tears. And of course, she's followed by her host and asks what's going on. And this woman tells her that when she turned 13 years old, her mother brought her into the basement of her house in Spain and taught her the Shema and said, this is a prayer that you say when you're about to die, which is true in Jewish tradition. And she said, this is a family secret, and you are never, ever, ever to tell anyone that you know these words. These words are secret among us. So you can imagine her reaction when the whole congregation stands up and loudly chants the Shema. And I've had many examples of people coming to me for conversion, and sure enough, they will tell a story that grandma, on her deathbed, or grandpa said that they were Jewish and they traced their lineage back. Sometimes these are people from Latin America, and they trace their lineage back, and it's no question that they are conversos. So it's a very interesting part of Sephardic history. Any questions or comments at this point before I jump back in? Okay. So just to give some highlights of Sephardic history, the Golden Age in Spain ends in 1391 with massacres beginning in Seville. There's a very interesting history, which I don't have time to go into, of Spain being Muslim, and then Spain being Christian, and then the Muslims, kind of fanatics from Morocco, reconquer Spain, and then there's something called the Reconquista of the Spanish Catholics reconquering the reconquering, and then refugees from Spain start leaving, but as early as 1391, and of course the major leaving is in 1492, and the Spanish go all over, the Mediterranean world. Sorry, I'm having a little trouble here. And so to Morocco, to Tunisia, to Italy, from Spain to Portugal, where they're expelled 5 years later, to Provence. We don't see it here, but they go into Belgrade and Turkey and Egypt and Greece, and even to Amsterdam and England. So it's a very interesting history, and they're traveling basically all over the Mediterranean. So I thought it would be fun to show you some Sephardic dress. So here's a bride and groom from Bukhara, a woman of Tangier in traditional dress. And here is a reception. Sonia tells me that this is Sonia's mother on the right at the king's palace. And you see these dresses like kind of have a stripe or a half circle down the side. And you see it here. I guess you don't see it there. And there's significance to this as well. There are very specific wedding customs. So here is Sonia marrying me. And here's Sonia from an earlier wedding in Morocco. And there are all kinds of fascinating ceremonies of henna, called the henna ceremony. And I don't know if you know what henna is, but it is a temporary dye, but it actually lasts several days. And it's put on very, very carefully in very intricate patterns. And I think generally in Sephardic celebrations, bar mitzvahs and so on, it's not uncommon to have a henna ceremony. And the henna lasts for maybe a week or so. Okay, general characterizations of the Ashkenazim and Sephardim. The Ashkenazim, by and large, are more oppressed over the centuries since the church has a theological chip on its shoulder. Basically, to keep Jews suppressed because we reject Jesus. So for the Christians, the Ashkenazim, remember, Jews that are living by and large in Christian lands, the Christians want to keep the Jews separate and controlled. This leads to separation, and the Christians forbid interaction, but so do the Jews. They're not interested in interacting with the Christian world. And so we have ghettos that arise beginning in Italy in the 1500s, and the significant genetic diseases because of so much inbreeding among the Ashkenazi Jews. There are genetic diseases in the Sephardic world as well, once again, because typically during this period, with some exception, Jews are marrying Jews, and they're small groups. The separation from the rest of the Jewish world leads to separate customs between the Ashkenazim and the Sephardim, and we'll see some of them, and more strict observance. Since we're not mingling so much with the rest of the world, people get more intense and more strict. As I mentioned, for about 1,000 years, the predominant intellectual seat of Judaism is in the Sephardic world. But then with the Renaissance in Western Europe, as Western Europe explodes in intellectual impact and vigor, so does the Ashkenazi world. And as the Muslim and Arab worlds tend to decline, so too does the Sephardic Jewish world. Rashi is a vintner living in France in the, I think in the 1200s. Ashkenazi is a great commentator on the Bible, and his commentary is detailed line by line, even word by word. The Ashkenazi rabbis developed the technique of pilpul. Pilpul means pepper, literally. It's a technique for dissecting and dissecting and dissecting and analyzing every nuance of every word. So again, as the Ashkenazim are living off by themselves, they are inwardly focused, and they get more and more intense in their analysis and their even Jewish law. Whereas we'll see in a moment, the Sephardic world is more interacting within the Muslim communities in which they live. So in the Sephardic world, they're better accepted in Babylon and even in medieval Islam. The Jews in Babylon are self-governing as early as the 2nd century of the Common Era, and 4 major schools are established that lead to the creation of the Babylonian Talmud. Under Muslim laws, communities that accept written revelation from God are called peoples of the book, and they include Jews and Christians. And the law is to protect such people if they are willing to submit to Muslim rule. And of course, the Jews are largely powerless during this period. And so by and large, the Muslims don't have a huge theological problem with Jews, and Jews even have less of a theological problem with Islam than they have with Christianity, because Islam is in theology and approach closer to Judaism than is Christianity. In Christianity, we have this very strange idea for Jews that God would become human, and religious law isn't so important. What is most important in Christian thought is proper faith and proper belief. Whereas in the Jewish world and in the Muslim world, we don't have the concept of God becoming human. Only God is God. And we also have the key influence of religious law. In Judaism, we call religious law halakha. In Islam, it's called Sharia, and they both mean the way to live, the proper path. The Muslims don't ghettoize or separate Jews to the same degree that the Christians do. And by and large, the Jews living in these worlds, especially in Spain, are interacting greatly with the Muslim world in commerce and literature, philosophy, and even theology. And one of my teachers explained it in a very interesting way. Spain was as far away from headquarters as you could possibly get. Headquarters for Jews was in the Holy Land. Headquarters for Muslims was in Mecca. And as far away from those places as you could possibly be was Spain. So the Jews in Spain and the Muslims in Spain have an easier time communicating with each other and feel less under the brow of the people in control. The Sephardic Jews living in this world quite often speak Arabic, and the Muslims now are beginning a development of their intellectual world. They investigate in detail the Arabic language and develop a grammatical understanding of Arabic. And since Arabic is actually quite similar to Hebrew, this spurs Jewish scholars to look at the Hebrew language and understand its grammar. Muslims develop theology, and this leads to Jewish theology. I repeat this quite often. For the most part, the Jews of the Talmud were not interested in theology. Theology is an organized understanding of the nature of God, the nature of sin, the nature of the afterlife, all the questions you might ask about God. This is theology. The Jews, by and large, weren't all that interested in that subject. The Jews were focused on, what am I supposed to do? So is there an afterlife? Isn't there an afterlife? You know, you're entitled to your opinion. It's not going to affect me. How do I decide if this particular chicken is kosher? That's really important. How do I hang the mezuzah on the doorpost? That's really important. But now the Jews are living in a world where Muslim philosophers and theologians are developing a highly structured theology of Islam. And I think the Jews are a little embarrassed that we don't have one too. So the leading Jewish thinker of the time is Maimonides. He lives in Egypt, and he actually comes from Morocco. And he decides to write a guide to people who are puzzled, and it's called The Guide to the Perplexed. And it's written in Arabic, and it's highly influenced by Aristotle. And some of the major ideas that we take for granted in Jewish thought, such as God's omniscience, the idea that God knows everything, God's omnipotence, God being all-powerful, and God's omnipresence, really enters Judaism in this period through the interactions and the discussions with Muslim philosophers. Yeah, here's the Maimonides as the classic Sephardic rabbi, both a theologian and a philosopher, and by the way, also a physician. Writes in Arabic and Hebrew, and his commentary is integrative. The Ashkenazim are digging deeper, 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 deeper to examine each grain of pepper. The Sephardim are looking at a much broader view of the world. So that's one of the key differences between the Ashkenazim and the Sephardim. The Kabbalah, the Jewish mysticism, is developed and expanded in the Sephardic world. And the central text of Kabbalah, the Zohar, is written in Spain. Of course, the tradition is that it was written in the Holy Land 1,000 years before this and discovered by the Spanish scholars and rabbis. But most scholars believe it was actually written in Spain, and there's some medieval Spanish that actually creeps into the Aramaic text of the Kabbalah. The influence of Sephardim declines as the influence of Islam declines. 600 years ago, half of the world's Jews were Sephardic. By the time of the Holocaust, less than 10% were Sephardic. And today, about 1 in 6 Jews are Sephardic. In Israel, half of Israel's population is Sephardic, because by and large, I don't know if I have it in the next slide. No, I don't. By and large, once the Arab world became controlled by Arabs, all those lands that I showed you where the Jews escaped, once the Arab nations were given hegemony, were given rule over their own lands, the Jews were very nervous, and almost all of the Jews living in those lands came to Israel, and some other places in northern Africa where French was spoken. Some of the Jews went to France, some of the Jews went to Spain, some of the Jews went to Montreal, French Montreal. So here's some images of Sephardic synagogues. They are notable because they have a central bima and people sitting around the edges. Here's one in Calcutta, and a woman's section sitting up on top. This synagogue was across the street from where Sonia grew up in Casablanca, built by her great uncle. And there's not much more to it than you see. There's maybe another row of chairs. Here's the reading table. There's the ark. And there's no women's section in this synagogue. The women would sit out on the porch while services were conducted. You know, the doors would be open and they could hear the prayers, but they would not enter. When Sonia's sons were bar mitzvah a while ago, I went to Casablanca and I conducted what I'm pretty sure is the one and only reform service ever to have been conducted in the Kingdom of Morocco. I'm also pretty sure it was the only time women ever entered this synagogue during a prayer service, but they insisted in staying separate from the men in the back of the synagogue. The other thing I noticed, and I never really got a good answer to this, is the Torah scrolls that I saw, both in Casablanca. I'm pretty sure this is in the synagogue in Casablanca, across from where Sonia grew up. But when I went to other synagogues also and were able to look at Torah scrolls, they all had a wrapping of either linen or maybe some other cloth. And the people guessed, and I asked my teachers back at HUC, they guessed it was a matter of strength. Maybe it helped to absorb moisture. I really don't know. But I've never seen it anywhere else, only in Morocco. Okay, let me just stop for a second and ask if there are any questions. David.
I attended a bar mitzvah in Los Angeles in a Sephardic congregation, and the women all sat with the men.
The women sat with the men?
Yes.
Intermingled or on a separate side?
Intermingled.
Okay.
Wives with husbands.
Okay, yeah, you would not find that in most of the Sephardic world, according to what I understand. Yeah, Larry.
Where do the Karaites come from?
The Karaites were, when the Talmud gets codified, so now we're talking about roughly 500 CE, and even before then, there were a small group of Jews who asked the same question that Bryce asked: what is this oral tradition and why do we have it? And we don't believe it and we're not accepting it. So the Karaites only accepted the authority of the written Bible. And there were interesting debates that lasted for a while, about 1,000 years, as to who would ultimately ascend and be in control. And one interesting example of this are Shabbat candles. When we light Shabbat candles, we say the blessing, which is a mitzvah blessing. We say a Asher Kidshanu b'mitzvah tav v'tzivanu. We say, blessed is God who has made us holy and gives us commandments. V'tzivanu, and commands us lahadlik ner shel Shabbat, to light the lights of Sabbath. Nowhere in the Torah or the Bible is there a commandment to light Sabbath lights. The comment about fire and the Sabbath is you will have no fire in your habitations on the Sabbath. And so there's a debate. And of course, the Karaites interpret this strictly without any oral tradition and says you should put out candles and you should put out any fires that you have burning on the Sabbath, reading the Torah simply and literally. The rabbinic Jews, Talmudic Jews, have an oral tradition which speaks about lighting candles. And that was, put up or shut up. Because you either were going to light candles just before the Sabbath, or you were going to put them out just before the Sabbath. And since we're lighting candles, you can see that the Rabbinites won. There are still a handful, maybe a few hundred or a few thousand Karaites in Israel, and I think there's a very small Karaite community in Los Angeles as well.
Now, would they go to a Sephardic synagogue, or would they go to an Ashkenazi?
I have had Karaites. There was a kid at a temple near me in Camarillo who was, I didn't know it, they were from a Karaite family. And the only way I knew it was they have a different way of tying their tzitzit. And I commented on it, I had never seen it before. And they said, oh, it's a Karaite way of tying it. And they had never mentioned that their family was Karaite. So I guess they were happy to be in any synagogue. Yeah. Okay. Let's see if there's more chat. However, the Karaites don't consider electric lights fire. This is Stephen. But I have a problem with using them on Shabbat because you're buying electricity. Yeah, so, okay. I didn't know that. Thank you, Stephen. Let's read his comment. Let's see where we are. Okay, so this is responding to the question that was asked a little earlier. Technically, Sephardic only refers to the Jews who are actually in Spain. The Hebrew word Sepharad means Spain. Ashkenaz, by the way, means Germany. So Ashkenazim, as I described, are Jews who derive their tradition from the Holy Land. But so you have Jews that were living in Muslim lands, but didn't come from Spain. So in fact, even in Morocco, the Jews that were living on the coast, such as Casablanca and Sonia's family, were definitely Sephardic. Sonia's grandparents spoke Spanish, and they traced their lineage from Spain. The Jews living inland in the Atlas Mountains came to that land, hundreds of years before the Sephardic Jews, but they adopted tradition. So you have Mizrahi Jews. The word Mizrach means east. You have Mizrahi Jews, which are technically not Sephardic, but their traditions are quite similar to the Sephardic Jews. So sometimes the word Sephardic is loosely used to describe them all. It's an important group of Mizrahi Jews in this country and in Los Angeles are the Persian Jews. They are definitely Mizrahi. They are definitely not Sephardic. The distinctions and differences, by and large, I would say Sephardic Jews and their rabbis are much more accepting of varying levels of observance. There are no movements, Orthodox, Conservative, and Reform, in the Sephardic world. As I got to know Sonia's family in Casablanca, and just asking about Jewish practice there, there was only one synagogue. There was definitely men and women were definitely not worshiping together. The law that applied was Orthodox. The services were Orthodox, but by and large, some people were more observant, some people were less observant. It's kind of like Israel. In Israel, oh gosh, no, I can't remember the name, they're called traditional Jews. The Talmudic concept, which is a very important concept in Jewish law, of Dina Malchuta Dina, that's Aramaic for the law of the land is the law, is a Sephardic one. It's in the Babylonian Talmud, but not in the Yerushalmi, in the Jerusalem Talmud. So again, you have this understanding that the Sephardic Jews are much more comfortable living in the land and intermingling with the authorities and with the populace in the land where they were living. I think many of you know that there's a Sephardic way to pronounce Hebrew and an Ashkenazi way to pronounce Hebrew. So for Sabbath, the Sephardim will say Shabbat, and the Ashkenazim will say Shabbos. And you'll hear a lot of Yiddish flavor in this. Yiddish is definitely a Ashkenazi culture and language. So for the prayer shawl in Sephardic pronunciation, it's a talit rather than talus. There's even difference in accents. So the word is amen in Sephardic pronunciation, omein. We have Adonai and Adonoi in Ashkenazi. And when I went to Hebrew school, and I suspect it may be true for some of you as well, I learned the Ashkenazi pronunciation. And when I went, I think after the 6-Day War, as a statement of solidarity or as an indication of solidarity with Israel, the reform and the conservative movement started using the Sephardic pronunciation of Hebrew. Certainly, if you go to Chabad and some other traditional synagogues, you will hear the Ashkenazi pronunciation. So also most of us will know the Kaddish. So in Sephardic pronunciation, it's Yit Gadal v'Yit Gadash. In Ashkenazi pronunciation, it's Yis Gadal v'Yis Gadash. Let's see where we are. Other customs and differences between the two worlds are laws about what you can eat. On Passover, both Sephardim and Ashkenazim are forbidden from eating chametz, but the Sephardim, being more and more rigorous, excluded a whole group of other foods called kiniyot, including rice, corn, peanuts, and beans. The Sephardim never excluded those foods. There's different customs in, many of us grew up on Hanukkah eating potato latkes because they're cooked in oil. And I used to think I came from a long line of potato pancake makers with my last name being Latka. But it turns out Latka in Russian means small boat. And the tradition of the Sephardic world were jelly donuts, also, cooked in oil. There are different methods for tying tzitzit in the Ashkenazi and the Sephardic world. Different prayer orders and prayer books and selections of prayers, particularly poetry. There are different methods of wrapping tefillin. There are different wedding customs. In the Sephardic world, the bride does not circle the groom. And it's also traditional for the couple to be wrapped in a talit during the 7 blessings. In the Sephardic world, polygamy is still practiced. And Sonia has told me stories of growing up, of Jews living in Casablanca with multiple wives. Whereas in the Ashkenazi world, again, under the influence of Christianity, where polygamy would be considered shameful and outrageous, about 1,000 years ago, Rabbeinu Gershom of Mainz, I think he is a son-in-law of Rashi. No, he couldn't be with those dates. I'm not sure. He forbade polygamy. Yeah, I don't think he's the son-in-law of Rashi. It is very common for Sephardic Jews to name their children after living grandparents. In fact, it's an insult not to. And as many of you know, in the Ashkenazi world, it would be a horrible insult to name a child after a living person. There's different types of Torah calligraphy and Torah cases, and food and culture are very different. That's why I always get a kick out of when people tell me they're not religious, they're cultural Jews. The culture of Sephardic Jewry, the culture that Sonia grew up in, the culture of Jews living in Ethiopia, of Jews living in India, is very different than the Ashkenazi Jews. but certainly different cultures. But no suggestion that Ashkenazi Jews don't intermarry with Sephardic Jews. Another very interesting aspect of Sephardic practice are what Sonia always talked about, the graves of the saints. And the word saint has a Christian sound to our ear, but it's a pretty good translation of tzaddik. Yes, Deborah is asking me privately, Sephardic Torah cases are round. I really should have had a picture of one of them. And kind of tubular. So the custom would be on given days, people would show up at the tomb of a highly revered person and light candles for this person. And Sonia has memories of going to, like a big picnic, and there you see a chimney. And I'll actually show another picture of people lighting candles to a saint. And typically these might have been miracle workers. So here's Rabbi Abraham, the miracle worker. I think it says Abraham Baal Nes, which is Abraham, the master of the miracle. An example occurred in the 1930s when a crippled youth suddenly made a radical and medically inexplicable recovery after visiting another tomb. And my son and I visited this tomb, Rabbi Shlomo Bar Chanash, which means Shlomo Baal, Shlomo, the master of the snakes. And they tell a story here of how this guy was thrown into a pit, and there were snakes in the pit, and the snakes actually, I think, brought food to him. And so he was a miracle worker, and people come to light candles. And there's so many candles that, you light them in this chimney, and you can see the candles, and there's pictures of all the people, of many people who came, who had miracles worked for them. There's a great story of the guy who is the keeper of this tomb, who was supposed to leave Morocco in the early 50s, but he had a dream. He was the guardian of this tomb. The tomb is very unusual because it's not in a synagogue. It's not in a cemetery. The tomb is off by itself by the side of the road. And the story we heard was that he was so beloved by so many different groups, each one of the groups fought to get him in their cemetery and to keep the peace. I'm not sure who decided this. He was given his own little place to be buried. And there have been guardians of the tomb. And this one guy had a dream that he should stay and take care of the rabbi. And the guy stayed there for 60 or 70 years. I think leaving only one day a year on Yom Kippur to pray with the Jews of Marrakesh. His entire family went to Israel. And for a few Moroccan dinars, the rabbi, I have some pictures, I don't have it there, blessed me and my son. And so far we're doing pretty well. I mentioned that virtually all the Jews living in the Arab world were brought out to Israel. So here's an example of the Yemenite Jews making Aliyah. And they go to this world, which is, almost entirely Ashkenazi, and the survivors of the camps, but by and large, a pretty 20th century educated people. And you have people whose culture is very different, and absorbing these people was quite a chore. Similar, when I was in Israel as a student, we worked with Ethiopian immigrants, where it was the same thing. They come out of a world which is in many ways centuries old into a modern world. Different kinds of symbols and foods. The chamsa is a very common symbol. I think many of you have seen it, often with an eye, which is sort of protecting against the evil eye. And then there's two thumbs here, which someone explained to me is that it can be giving or taking. So both giving and taking is under God's control. It's a symbol that comes out of Islam, and the Jews adopt as a symbol. And I can testify to the delights of dafina, which is a Sephardic answer to cholent. Both dafina and cholent are Sabbath afternoon meals which are cooked slowly. Since you can't light a fire on the Sabbath, the idea is you start cooking the cholent or the dafina on Friday before sunset, and on Saturday, everything's been thoroughly cooked, and it is delicious. I mentioned Ladino as a folk language, a mixture of medieval Spanish and Hebrew. We heard Ein Kelohenu, and we're going to hear one more Ladino song, which is one of my favorite, Non Con Vuestro Dio, whereas Yiddish is a mixture of German and local Eastern European languages, and of course is the Ashkenazi version. Sephardic culture, particularly in modern times, is more male-centered, and it's due to the influence of Islamic culture, which is much more focused on the role of the man as the ruler of the house. Whereas Ashkenazi culture, as a cultural phenomenon, like, you know, Italian culture and Greek culture, gives a lot of power, particularly over family matters, to the women. There are a number of people, some notable Sephardic Jews that I gleaned from the internet, including, I have to point out, Emmanuel Shriki, because Sonia's father's name was Shriki, a Canadian actress, Disraeli, Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, Moses Montefiore, Nachmanides, who was a very famous Kabbalist and mystical commentator on all things, and Sonia traces her family back to Nachmanides. Jerry Seinfeld is on here. Jerry Seinfeld's humor is very Ashkenazi, but I guess his origins are Sephardic. Peter Sellers, Spinoza, and so on. There are wonderful books, and you know, you can find them. And I'm going to stop sharing for a moment to ask for questions before I move toward wrapping things up. So, any questions? I thought I heard somebody. Yes, David.
Is not the Shukier family?
I'm sorry?
Sephardic? Our Cantor, is not his family?
Yeah,
Sephardic?
we were discussing that. Somebody, I think Larry, you were saying that they trace their origins to Turkey. And Shukyar certainly does not sound like an Ashkenazi name.
Herb said that.
Yeah, you said Herb, the Cantor's father. Okay. Any other questions?
And Joel Strode is excuse me, is Sephardic.
Yeah.
No, he sings in the choir.
There is a very large Persian, so Mizrahi. I think 50 or 60,000 Jews in Los Angeles area are Persians. Seattle has a very large Sephardic community. Sonia's brother lives there.
There's a large Persian section in Eden Cemetery.
Yeah, and the graves are very distinctive. You see writing in Farsi as well as in Hebrew.
And they have vertical headstones rather than flush with the ground.
Yeah, Jay?
I've had the pleasure of going to the Sephardic synagogue on Wilshire.
Mm-hmm.
And I would certainly recommend it. If anybody wants to go to a Shabbos service and see it's not Orthodox. It's not ultra-Orthodox, but it is a beautiful, beautiful service handled with a great deal of decorum.
Mm-hmm.
The people dress beautifully. Just a very, very interesting Jewish service.
Mm-hmm. Okay, Beth.
I just had one comment, a humorous one. In the 70s, I went to Columbia University to study Yiddish, and someone there said, you should go to the Sephardic temple on Tisha B'Av because their service is very different. It's really interesting. So a bunch of us got together and went to the Sephardic temple on Tisha B'Av. And then I realized I've never been to a temple on Tisha B'Av. I have no idea what a Orthodox Tisha B'Av service was, so I couldn't tell you what anything was different, but it was a very beautiful service.
Yeah, one of the things I actually was sitting in on a discussion today about Sephardic and Mizrahi life in Los Angeles, and the rabbi was commenting that he actually had an interesting description of Sephardic Jewry as warm weather Judaism. You know, you have Morocco, which is a lot like Southern California, and Israel, for that matter, which is a lot like Southern California, rather than Poland and Russia, which is not much like Southern California. And the rabbi even chanted a little bit from Eicha, which is a scroll traditionally chanted on Tisha B'Av. Tisha B'Av, the 9th day of Av, coming up in a few weeks, commemorates the destruction of the temple, the expulsion from Spain, and about 3 or 4 other horrible things that happened. But he said, even if you listen to Eicha chanted in a Sephardic synagogue, it's not celebratory, but it is somewhat joyous, and there is an influence from the Muslim world of that. So I know exactly what you mean. Larry.
So on my first trip to Israel, we were at Safad, and they have the Sephardic synagogue at one end of the walk, and then the Ashkenazi at the other end. You walk down this, like, I don't know if it's a path or, a narrow lane. Anyway, what I was amazed, I never saw a Sephardic Torah, or, they use those containers, like it's a metal container. Well, they had metal containers there. It's like a tube.
Yes.
That they would open up and read and then take the Torah out. But one of the questions I have to ask you, in Safad, the Orthodox, the Ashkenazic or Orthodox shul and the Sephardic synagogue had the bima in the middle. Now, who took it from who? Where did the Ashkenazic take it from the Sephardic? Did they do it first? Or how did that all come about?
I'm not certain. I think moving the bima to the front, I've heard it described as one of the phenomenons of American religion and American Judaism, because it's the transition to the idea that there's a presenter and an audience. If there's a presenter, rabbi and cantor, an audience, congregation, then it makes sense to have the stage in front. But if you're, in a way, in other synagogues, it doesn't make so much sense to have the stage and to have the bima in front. Sermons weren't a big thing in Judaism until fairly recently. And the issue is somebody was leading prayers. And as you know, for many prayers, most prayers, you're facing east. So the bima, the ark would be on the eastern wall. Although if you're in, Israel, it would be on the wall that's facing Jerusalem. And if you're in Jerusalem, it's the wall that's facing the Temple Mount. And so it makes perfect sense to have the reading table in the middle of the synagogue facing the bima, facing the ark. Jay.
The temple that I went to on Wilshire Boulevard, the bima was right in the middle.
Yeah.
And the seating ran the entire way, both sides. Men and women still sat together.
Interesting.
But and it was fascinating. One quaint little story is I went with Joel. Okay. Did you go with us, Bryce? Bryce can't hear me.
Okay, go ahead.
So he told me, he said, you got to wear a jacket. So, we had to get dressed. It's not like coming to TAE. During the service, 2 young guys, I would say in their late teens, early 20s, come walking through the door wearing a shirt and slacks. And from the bima comes the shamus. And he comes right down the center. He grabs the 2 guys, turns them around and takes them out of the sanctuary. And 5 minutes later, they walk in wearing a jacket.
Huh, it's like fancy restaurants.
It was just, it was.
Yeah, and I think also in the East, it tends to be more focus on dress. Okay, I'm gonna go back toward the end. I want to mention the things that are coming up, and I do have a little more music and an interesting story. In August, I'm going to be taking the next 2 Wednesdays off. I didn't want to have a class on Tisha B'Av. So in August, I'm going to have a 3-session class on these 3 Wednesdays at 7 o'clock on science and religion. And I've taught this occasionally from time to time, so some of you have had the opportunity of attending, but I've never done it on Zoom and on the internet, and never recorded it. So I hope some of you will join me then. And then beginning in late August, and we'll get the details out shortly, I'm going to be teaching the Introduction to Judaism class, which is a 3-session taste of Judaism, overview, and then 15 more sessions in detail. And I'm doing this because I know there are a number of people who are interested in conversion, but there's also many of people like me, and that's how I got hooked on Judaism, is taking a class like this. So, I think you all know how to find me now. If you go to my website, you just click there to check out the classes and join a conversation. I wanted to show this story. This is 2 of Sonia's aunts. Someone's sending a chat. I meant most of the, these are 2 of Sonia's aunts. And the way I remember her telling the story, she can run in here and correct me if I mistake it. Sonia's looking through a photo album, and there were, I wish I had a picture of the whole family. There's a family picture, and this young lady is in the picture. And Sonia asks her mother, "Who is she?" And Sonia's mother says, "That's my sister." And Sonia says, well, there must be more to this story. So the story is, it's a great love story. And the love story was Sonia's grandfather, when he was, just before he was to be bar mitzvah at age 13, he went on a trip to Gibraltar, not far from Morocco, to buy cloth for his bar mitzvah suit. And I think they were visiting someone in Tangier, a family, Jewish family in Tangier. And they knock on the door. Sonia, the man who would be Sonia's grandfather, he's 12 something. And Sonia's, and I presume great-grandfather, knock on the door, and this 4-year-old girl answers the door. And all of a sudden, Sonia's grandfather understands his dream. He had had a dream that he was in an orchard and he was picking apples. And he went to pick this beautiful apple, but someone in the dream told him, "No, you can't pick this apple because it is not yet ripe." So at age 13, roughly, he falls in love with a 4-year-old girl and announces to the family who is there, "I am going to marry this girl." And, go on. And sure enough, when she is, I think, 11 or 12, and he's about 20 or 21, they get married. And of course, she's too young to have any kind of sexual relations. But Sonia's grandfather was a well-known person in the Casablanca community, and a rich person gave her a black baby girl as a doll to practice on. So when she grew up, she would know how to take care of babies. And of course, this is a Jewish family. They're not going to treat this young girl as a slave or anything other than a full member of the family. And she was the oldest sister in the family. And I believe she died at around age 21 or so of tuberculosis. So, in some ways, when I hear stories from Sonia's family, it's like it is out of a different century and a different world. This is a song, it's one of my favorite Ladino songs, Cuando el Rey Nimrod, also known as Avraham Avinu. It's in Ladino, published, written around the time of the expulsion, very popular. And I hope you enjoy it as much as I do. But I hope you watch the expressiveness of the singer's face. This to me says all you need to know about Sephardic culture and Sephardic women.
Cuando el rey Nimrod alto salía, miraba en el cielo y en la estrellería, vi la luz santa en la churrería que había de nacer Abraham Avinu. Abraham Avinu, Padre querido, Padre bendito, luz de Israel. Abraham Avinu, Padre querido, Padre bendito, luz de Israel. La mujer de Tera quedó preñada, de día en día él le preguntaba, ¿de qué tenés la cara tan demudada? Ella ya sabía y bien lo tenía. Abraham Avinu, Padre querido, Padre bendito, luz de Israel. Abraham Avinu, Padre querido, Padre bendito, luz de Israel. En fin de 9 meses parir quería, iba caminando por campos y viñas, a su marido tal no le descubría, topó una meada, ahí lo pariría. Abraham Avinu, Padre querido, Padre bendito, luz de Israel. Abraham Avinu, Padre querido, Padre bendito, luz de Israel. Luz de Israel, luz de Israel.
Okay, so the words there were Avram Avinu, that's Hebrew, Avram, our father, Avram Bendicho, Bendicho is Spanish for blessed, Avram Querido, beloved, Luz de Israel, light of Israel. Hope you enjoyed it. And let's see, I don't know if I have you muted or not. No, I can unmute you all. Any questions, comments?
Good show.
Thank you. David?
Yeah, just wanted to comment. You were talking, there's the Ashkenazi and the Sephardim and the Mizrahi.
Mm-hmm.
But I actually, God, it's been several decades. There was an article in the LA Times quite a long time ago about the 3 different groups of Jews in India.
Okay, that's not something I'm knowledgeable about.
One group migrated to India before the time of the story of Esther, actually. They have no knowledge of Purim. Another group migrated to India when the Romans destroyed the temple. And the third group, mostly on the west coast, what used to be the Portuguese colony of Goa, came during the expulsion.
Interesting.
And they each have different traditions.
And then, the group I have a little more knowledge of are the Ethiopian Jews, and their origins are uncertain. Some people trace them, I think they trace themselves back to the Queen of Sheba, one of Solomon's wives. And the interesting thing about them, and I don't know about India, it would be very interesting to know, but in the Ethiopian world, they were separated from the rest of the Jewish world before the time of the Talmud. So they had no knowledge of the Talmud. They were, I guess you would say, they were Karaites. And they were discovered by the Jewish world, I think in the mid-1800s. And the rabbis went there and started teaching them rabbinic Judaism. And there's all kinds of ramifications of that. So I always say that every Jew has an interesting immigration story of how they got where they are. Any other questions or comments? Larry, I don't know if you're holding up your hand.
I just looked up the Jews of India. One's called the Cochin, Cochin Jews, and the other one is called Chanai, Chnai, and they were the so-called Spanish and Portuguese Jews.
Interesting.
Then there's the Nagarkol, Nagercoil, Jews, so-called Syrian Jews, and let's see if there's any more. And then the Jews of Goa, Goa, they were Portuguese Jews who fled Portugal.
Interesting.
And then there's another one, another branch is called the B'nai Yisrael community of Karachi. But if you go in, if you put in Google the Jews of India, and there's the Baghdadi Jews, Baghdadi. There's a whole bunch of them here.
Okay. Beth?
They're numerous in India. If you just go on Google and you can look up Jews of India, and boy, it lists them.
Beth, you're muted.
This, my husband Dave has a comment.
When I was a kid, my father worked at Lockheed, and he worked with two guys from India, Albert and Mordecai Albert, who'd come over here as adults and spoke English, Indian English, and then learned American English. And they're both Jews. They went to temple with us.
Interesting, yeah.
And I have no idea, other than there's supposedly from 5 villages. There are 5 villages in northern India that they came from, but I don't know anything beyond that.
Okay.
But Albert, Mordecai Albert.
Okay.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you.
That was very interesting.
You are very welcome. I wanted to thank Sherry. I don't know if she's listening, but for supporting this work. And remind you, you're always welcome to drop by between 4 and 5. Sometimes we discuss golf. Sometimes we discuss the meaning of life. Sometimes we discuss physics. Bryce and I get into physics that is so esoteric, even we have no idea what we're talking about.
It's better than when you talk about golf.
Oh, okay, good. Okay, yes.
I really enjoyed it.
Okay, thank you, Sherry.
Thank you so much, Yasher Koach.
Okay,
for all that you do for the community, and I'm very proud that you are the Federation Rabbi.
Thank you. I am proud to be. I don't know, Jose, if you can unmute yourself.
What's the name of the place, Ray?
Here's Jose.
Yeah. Hello, everyone.
I'm sorry.
Hello.
Thank you. It's good. Jose was one of my congregants in Guatemala. So
oh boy.
I hope you were able to more easily understand the Spanish of the Ladino.
Yeah, a little bit.
Okay, it's nice. It's nice to have you here, Jose. Jose's English is much better than my Spanish.
How was Anza Borrego?
Anza Borrego was great. Sonia and I spent some delightful time separated from the rest of the world in the desert, Bamidbar.
We've camped there.
Yeah. We would not want to camp there.
Well, in a motorhome.
Oh, okay. So thank you all. It's good to see you and hear you.
Thank you.
See you next time.
Thank you very much, all.
Take care.
Good night.